Hey folks, welcome back to Nodevember day 6 now. This one is riveted. For this prompt, I decided to make a little robot with some rivets going around it, and this process that you're watching me do now is absolutely not something that you should be doing in production. This is awful practice. It's far too ineffectual. Like, it takes so long to do anything. You're tweaking stuff around. It's not even particularly parametric. Like, I'm not connecting stuff in a way that's meaningful. I'm just putting stuff where I want it to be. So it would be much faster for me to model this by hand, but that is not really in the spirit of things. So for this one, I literally just took a half a UV sphere, joined it onto the top of a cylinder, put another little cylinder at the bottom. That's your head shape. And then for the neck, I've taken a curve line and just use the profile curve of a curved circle and set the radius going up it. And then I've also used I've used the point index of the main spline, modulate by 2 to give me an alternating value, and then use that to multiply the radius as well, just to make it feel like sort of like an accordion, like it comes in and out every other edge loop. And then you can see at the moment I'm looking at making the shoulder form, and I was looking at using the mesh to SDF grid, but struggling to get any results that I was really happy with. You can really see the resolution of the grid, and I don't think it was actually really helping me. So ultimately decided to get rid of it here, and then I'm just using mesh booleans. So I've got a cylinder for the main neck section, and just a stretched icosphere for the volume of the chest, and then I'm using a pair of cubes to chop off one on each side to square off those shoulder sections. Creating a little boss on the neck section to connect from the body onto the little neck piece. And that is just literally a cone where I've extruded the bottom. I really love using the cone node because you have a top and a bottom radius separately, so you can create some really interesting shapes. And then I just copied that up exactly onto the ear, positioned it where I wanted. And then I'm just using a curve line, and again using curve circle as my profile, and then using the spline parameter factor through a float curve to set my radius along it, and just setting a high resolution as you can see on this wireframe. So doing this is really sculpty, push around vertices a lot. Makes it very easy to work with and create these kind of revolved forms, which is always quite nice for this kind of artwork. I wasn't really that happy with how the side of the head was intersecting with this ear piece. I thought it was, because of the radius of the cylinder for the head, it made it quite difficult to connect in sideways. So what I've done is I've used some proximity to the ear geometry to pull out the side of the head there and just kind of square it off a little bit, and it just makes it meet a lot better. Duplicated the ear onto the other side, didn't do anything else to it, just perfect symmetry there. And then I copied the nodes that I used for that earpiece and adjusted them slightly. Added an icosphere, so this becomes the mouth or the snout, depending on whether you think it looks like a dog. And I used the icosphere instead of the profile this time, just because I wanted the reflection to be much more like spherical, rather than it having a little bit of variation from the float curve interpolation. So the next thing I'm doing here is I'm actually just making a rivet. I wasn't quite ready to use them, but I thought I had these nodes, so I'm just going to copy them off and get that ready for when I start sticking rivets onto things. And then the next thing I was going to do here was to create the eye socket. So this is just a little piece of metal that I sort of created this fluted form. Again, exactly the same process, this time using a map range as well, so that I can set my minimum radius a bit easier. Taking the whole thing, extruded the bottom edge, and then also took the top edge, based on that original spline factor. Took the top edge, extruded it, scaled it in, extruded it down. That gave me the socket, and then I just put a sphere in for the eye. And then again, just taking this, transforming it, and then taking a duplicate which is symmetrical in the x-axis. That gives me the pair of eyes there. A little bit of a, almost like a mohawk piece, just to give a little bit of interest to the top of the head. So just took an arc, positioned it in the correct location for the head, and then I'm starting to add some rivets to it at this point. This is one of those things where I'm saying that this is not a good process to use. It is probably something where, like if you were doing this as a generator or you were doing this as a larger system, you would probably want to do all of these additional features as some, like their position would be some parameter of the head. So as you change the head later, everything like the eyes, the ears, the mouth, and this sort of hair is going to stay connected to it. Which again is why I'm saying this isn't particularly, I don't know, not very sort of good parametricism. We're just sticking stuff where we want it to be. So I've taken an exact copy of the nodes that I used for the ears and just adjusted the float curve, and now that is an antenna. Stuck one of those on each side. And then I'm also going to duplicate up the neck and change the parameters on that, just to give me something to stick in the middle that has that same kind of sort of pinched in look. Using the same things again for the connection onto the shoulders. It seems like if you've defined this language for things that move as having this shape, that you should follow that through. So just doing exactly the same thing. Even took another copy of the head and turned that into the shoulder piece. And then I just created a couple of toruses out of a circle with another circle as the profile. And used those to connect onto the shoulders, just adding additional bit of mesh everywhere that you have stuff intersecting, and it'll just make it feel a little bit more natural when you start connecting things. Took another copy of the mouth, stuck one of those onto each cheek, and then just tweaking a few things. At this point I'm beginning to put rivets actually onto things, so we're now actually doing the breathe. So I just took my ears, and these were obviously made at the origin position, and then they're transformed into place, so I can just take one of them, stick all my rivets on, and then it's going to move into the correct location for both the left and the right ear. Again, just sticking some rivets up the head here, so that's around the bottom, and then the next one up around the midsection. And then same process, exactly the same, just taking a circle, instancing rivets on that geometry and aligning it to the curved tangent with a bit of custom rotation afterwards. So you just use a rotate rotation set to local, and that'll allow you to do a little bit of twisting around the curve. So a couple around the neck just to make everything feel like it's connected, and then I'm just doing one here on the actual shoulder piece just to create a bit more detail there. And then I'm trying to work out a good way of attaching rivets to the rest of the body, and I decided that actually hand placing them was going to work best. So I took a new collection and used a bunch of empties, taking that collection info node, separate children, and then instance to points. So empties don't contain any geometry, but you can read the location, rotation, and scale off them if you pull in that data. So in this case, I'm actually taking the point defined by that empty. I'm locating the nearest surface position with a geometry proximity node, and then I'm also checking what the nearest surface normal is to that empty, and I'm instancing rivets on each of these points following the surface normal that we're sampling. So it's a really simple way to then basically just position a bunch of empties on your model and have all of your rivets follow exactly to the surface. You can have a bit more fun as well, because it's much easier to move an empty than it is to tweak values in a node. So you can play around different positions for things, different eyebrow shapes, whatever you need. And then I just ran around the node graph and created Boolean attributes on a few different things. So wherever I wanted the actual metal of the robot, I gave that one attribute, and then where I wanted the black for the eyes, I gave that another attribute, and then everything else is just going to be this kind of gold trim. Using ambient occlusion as well, just to pull a bit of dirt into the inner corners, and then also driving the roughness and metallic value with that ambient occlusion as well to reduce the reflectiveness. Decided to go for a rusty look, so took a really simple noise texture, high detail, passed that through a colour ramp that was defining my rust colour and my paint colour, and then used a greater than, or actually a less than in this case, based on the transition between the rust and the paint. That creates my mask, and then I just use an add before both of those nodes if I want to offset the amount of rust, if I want to increase it or reduce it. And so I can add more rust where there's ambient occlusion, and I can also add more rust where it points upwards in this case. So really easy workflow. Pointing up, by the way, we're just taking the surface normal dot product against 0, 0, 1, so the up vector, and that tells us how similar the surface normal is to upwards. And so you get +1 for any face which points straight up, -1 for any face which points straight down, and 0 for anything which points sideways. And you can use that gradient to control anything that you want for distribution. For lighting, I began with something pretty dramatic, black background, a couple of lights, just really aggressively pointing in on it, and then decided to soften it a little bit, add an extra couple of lights, and brought it up to the final render. So there we go. Hope you learned something, hope you had fun, and I will catch you in the next one.